I would love for you to type in one of the vegetables that you are excited to try growing or to be growing this coming season. So go ahead and type in a vegetable that you're excited about. Carrots, tomatoes, potatoes, squash, artichokes, cucumbers, radishes. Amazing. This is great. This is great. Perfect. Well, hey, it looks to me like the chat function is working. So for any of you who have not been on one of our happy hours yet and have not met me, my name is Jordan and I'm the founder at Mind and Soil. We are a gardening business based out of Squamish, British Columbia, Canada, and we approach things a little bit differently in that we are entirely focused on connecting individuals to the mental health benefits of gardening. So for those of you that have been gardening for kind of more than a season and you keep on coming back to the garden, I'm guessing that a big reason why you do come back to the garden is because of how good it feels to be getting your hands dirty, the peace, the calm, the restoration that comes with it. And for some of those of you that are on the newer side to gardening, maybe in your first year or your second year, I know that it can be a little bit daunting, a little bit scary. When we think about soils, where do we get started? How do we amend? How do we make sure we've got beautiful, rich soil for our babies to be growing in? And that learning curve can be a little bit stressful, overwhelming, and daunting. So I see a huge, huge, huge part of our responsibility here at Mind and Soil to flatten and reduce that learning curve as much as possible so that each and every one of you can be tapping into those mental health benefits as quickly as possible. And for our session this evening, I'm so excited and fortunate to be joined by Mark McDonald, who is the communications manager over at West Coast Seeds. And the title communications manager could not be a bigger kind of understatement or underselling of having Mark on the call here. If anybody has read any of the articles or the content that's come out on West Coast Seeds' website, it's very likely that Mark has been behind it because he's been gardening for years and years and is an absolute expert. I can already see a couple fans in the chat saying, yeah, Mark. So I'm going to pass it over to Mark to let him do a quick introduction and share a little bit of his background on and gardening journey.
Hey, thanks. Thank you, Jordan. And good evening to everyone. Yeah, my name is Mark. I do basically the words and pictures here at West Coast Seeds for the most part. I help contribute to the catalog, to the seed packets, to the website. I do blog entries, and I spend my summer when I'm not working from home at the farm, basically taking pictures of all the produce that is coming off the property. It's really important for us to accurately depict the stuff that Annie is growing and harvesting. So we are happy to be here.
Awesome. And Mark, since I've got you on the line here, I'd love to hear what's one of the vegetables that you're excited to be growing this year. And if there's also a garden flop or blunder that comes to mind from last season that you had or experienced maybe.
Oh, that puts me on the spot. I haven't had a really serious garden blunder. Last year, I guess the big surprise last year was that our lupins came up and there was a mallard duck nesting in it that we had to sort of, I've got 9 raised beds in a fenced area, so we had to sort of be very delicate around letting her do her thing until the chicks hatched. And she ended up having 10 ducklings. In terms of stuff that I'm excited about growing this year, I'm always excited to grow things like quinoa and amaranth, and some of the products are a little bit off the usual map. No. And I have my standard crops that I go back to and varieties that I rely on every year, like red ace beets and, the standards.
Yeah, love it. Perfect. Well, yeah, it's absolutely great to have you joining us this evening here. So folks, we're going to go ahead and start diving in here. And I've got a feeling based off of the excitement in the chat function there that there's probably quite a few individuals who have some plant babies that have already germinated. You might have started a couple of seeds and they're starting to grow. And they're kind of just doing their thing now under the grow lights until it gets a little bit warmer and it's time to move them out into their forever homes. But that gives us a great little window here to start prepping their forever homes and thinking about how do we get that soil as good and bountiful for them so that they can have an absolutely amazing spring and summer ahead here. And so to get started on that, I'd love to hear kind of what the state of your soil is. So in the chat function, go ahead and let us know if you need to be kind of starting a planter box or a grow bag or a raised bed for the very first time, or if you are looking to rejuvenate your soil over the course of the season here, or if you maybe are in a brand new garden for the very first time. Okay, so we've got some rejuvenation happening, some raised beds, some starting some new planters. Amazing. Perfect. So what we're going to be covering off on today is we're first going to talk about how do we get our soil ready for any new beds and any new grow bags that we would be looking to get started with. And then the next piece from there is we're going to cover off on how do we rejuvenate soil that is in our beds that we've been gardening in for the last 1, 2, 3+ years. And then lastly, we're going to touch just a little bit on how to utilize soil tests as well here over the course of the year to then target and amend very specific parts of our garden. And what I want to say to everybody here is a huge part of what we're all about is making it as simple as possible. And so on that front, if there's one thing that you take from our session today, it's to use compost, to use worm castings, and to use minerals. And if you have those 3 things going into your garden beds, you're going to be in a really great place. And to look at that from an actual testing perspective, I went ahead and tested one of my beds that has only been receiving compost and worm castings. And take a look at this. The NPK were even above optimum. They're all the way into excess. And that just goes to show the amount of nutrients that can come just from compost is absolutely through the roof. So if you want us to go ahead and get started here and talk about the first part, which is the soil recipe for setting up a brand new grow bag or bed, go ahead and type in "let's go" on the chat function there. Kimberly's saying, "Let's go."
These are fast typers.
No kidding. All righty. Looks like everybody is ready to roll here. So the very first piece that we're going to talk about is how do we set up a new grow bag for the season here? And there's a couple of reasons why we would want to use grow bags. First piece is that it's really great for learning your space. If you're in a new area, before you make a big infrastructure investment and build out a whole bunch of raised beds, take a season to grow by grow bags first, because it's going to allow you to understand how the sun moves throughout your yard over the course of the season. An area that you thought might have been really great in March or April when you would have been building that raised bed could end up getting a huge shadow from a house or a tree as the sun moves. So by using that grow bag in year 1, you're going to understand where at those kind of peak days of summer are the best places for your vegetables to be receiving the most sun possible. And a fun game to be playing with this is to take your grow bags, and you're only allowed to move it 1 time per day. So you move your grow bag and then you have to leave it there for the rest of the day to see how you do with finding the areas with the most sun. The second reason why grow bags can be really great for those of you that are in a patio or a townhouse or something that's a little bit smaller, like an apartment, they're really good for small space environments. So to fill up a grow bag or a container, there's 3 things that we're going to be needing. And that is cocoa coir, compost, and perlite. And the recipe that we're going to be utilizing is equal parts of the 3 of them. So the first thing that we're going to be doing to be building up our soil here is we're going to measure each of those inputs nice and evenly. So I bought my cocoa coir there that I filled up. The next one is my compost right there. And the third one is the perlite. Definitely recommend either wearing a mask or taking a big deep breath in before you pour your perlite, because it gets quite dusty. You don't want to be breathing that in when you do it. So once you've got them all measured out there, you're going to go ahead and put them onto a tarp or something along those lines and begin to mix them all up. So you can see here, I'm walking around in a circle, just lifting from the bottom, turning it over, and continuing along. And before you know it, you've got a really beautiful mixture that we can be utilizing to fill up a grow bag or a container. And it's going to be looking something like this. So we can see in my hand there, it even already looks nice and fluffy and easy for the roots to be growing through. And this is where there's absolutely an opportunity for you as the gardener to make some changes to this. You could go ahead and you could add in a little bit more compost, as an example, to increase the amount of organic matter going in there. So when I looked at this mix when I was making it the other day, I thought, yeah, I do want a little bit more compost in there. I filled up another big 5-gallon pail of compost, dumped that in, mixed it all up, and had it ready to go. So in this instance, the compost is where we're getting a lot of our nutrients from, as well as all the microbes and bacteria. And then the perlite and the cocoa coir, they're making it lighter, fluffier, and increasing the drainage there. Once we've got that mix all put together and ready to go, we are then going to just go ahead and start scooping that into our grow bags here. So the first one you can see was a container, and that's what a grow bag looks like there. And that's about I believe that one was a 3-gallon grow bag, and then a 5-gallon grow bag, followed lastly by a 7-gallon grow bag that I'm filling up here. So we've got our grow bags all set and ready to go. The last thing that we're going to do for our plant babies, and we don't do this until it's a little bit warmer out and we're ready to move our plant babies from outside, or sorry, from underneath their grow lights into the outdoors, is that we need to kind of amend the soil at the point of transplanting. And so what that consists of is a combination of worm castings and the minerals. And we're going to be getting those minerals from Gaia's 444. Okay, so what we can see here is I put my 3 plants down, and in that first one, I'm going to go ahead and scoop some of it out to make a little hole, 2 handfuls of worm castings, then about 2 tablespoons of Gaia's 444, mix it around, pop the baby in, backfill it, compact, couple more handfuls, a little bit more Gaia, and then that plant baby has all the nutrients, all the biology that it needs, and a really beautiful mix to be living in. Doing the
And
same
it's going to be
thing.
huge.
Yes, it is. And you know, Mark, as the video runs here, one thing that I would be curious to hear your thoughts on is just kind of like the size of grow bags that you like to go with for different vegetables.
For any container, I think the most important thing is that you've got 4 inches of depth minimum and excellent drainage. And so depending on the size of your plant, it looks like you've got a kale plant or a broccoli there in the middle.
Yeah, yeah.
That's going to be a substantial plant, and I think that's an adequate size for that type of vegetable. For tomatoes, I would go minimum 5 gallons. And you know, the more the merrier. If you can afford 10-gallon, or you have the space for 10-gallon containers or bags, that'll get you more life out of your soil over the course of the summer.
Perfect. Love that. So folks, that's what we would be looking to do there for getting our grow bags ready to go, or containers ready to go for the season. And I'm just going to go ahead and pause here for a second, because another question that came through in the chat there was just in terms of like compost sources. And Mark, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts, any preferences when it comes to, you know, what compost it is that you like to use and ultimately get into your grow bags or beds.
Okay, I mean, ideally, if you have the space again and the equipment, run your own compost. That's the simplest. It makes the best use of stuff that's coming out of your garden that you're not using. Not everybody, you know, some people in co-ops don't allow compost because they attract rats or whatever. If you've got a yard or a garden, starting a compost is a very, very good idea, and it's a relatively free source of nutrients for your soil. If you can't get that, I've used sea soil, I've used bagged mushroom compost to good effect. And these are products like you can prep your bed pretty much by spreading a layer on the surface of the soil and let the soil organisms move that up and down in the soil column. But it's also available from some municipalities. There's compost sales in Richmond, BC, and I think Vancouver does one annually, maybe not during the COVID, but that's been a thing in the past too.
Yeah, and on that front, I was curious to get your thoughts on this, because they have, you know, like the compost that would come from, say, like a landfill, where they have to follow all the regulations to make it. Is that something that you would use in your beds, or would you skip out on that one?
You know, I think there's a measure of unpredictability, like you don't really know what's in it. And that's sticking with a bagged product or one that's brought in by a garden center that you like, that you trust. It's just you get a little bit better picture of what you're actually putting into the soil. So again, if you or you and your neighbors or you and your community garden can organize your own composting, that's really the best deal.
Perfect. Love it. And I saw a question just come through there. Where can I buy perlite in the Sea to Sky? So given that I'm here in Squamish, I get all of mine from Pacific Northwest Garden Supply. They've got bags and bags of it. So Johanna, I believe it is, you'd be able to head over there and load up for your grow bags containers. Perfect, folks. Well, why don't we continue along here and dive into soil recipe number 2, which is all around raised beds. And the reason why we would go down the path of potentially utilizing a raised bed instead of a container or a grow bag is because we simply have a much larger space. So if you have a backyard, this is very common, the path to go down, utilizing, kind of like a 4-foot by 8-foot raised bed, or any kind of other dimension that you're feeling would fit in well with your space. Another big perk to why you would potentially want to be using raised beds is because you need fewer materials. There's a lot more space, better drainage as a result of that. And once you've got your compost in there, you just need to put wood around it. But in many instances, people are actually beginning to even move away from putting containing walls on their garden beds, and they're just mounding up soil. And the truly incredible and amazing thing that happens with raised beds is that if we are continuing to add organic matter into that raised bed, year over year, that soil ecosystem is going to begin to develop and grow and ultimately kind of be sprawling out to find more nutrients, more water sources for your plants to grow nice and big and strong. I saw a question from Janine there around how deep should your raised beds be? And we're going to be touching on that as we cruise through here. So I don't think that we could go into raised beds without mentioning the one and only Charles Dowding. And so Charles Dowding is kind of like the almost like the godfather of all things no-till, no-dig, raised bed, and planting in 100% compost. So if you haven't heard of Charles Dowding, I'd highly, highly recommend hopping onto YouTube and taking a look at some of his videos, because he's like in many ways like the Bob Ross of the gardening world. Watching him with his English accent just kind of puttering throughout his garden, working away on things, is one of like the most peaceful and calming and soothing things that you could do. So in order to build out a raised bed, the first thing that we need to do is lay down some cardboard to block any of the weeds that are coming through. So you can see me doing that. I'm having a laugh as Jeanette's mentioning the same thing about Charles Dowding and how relaxing he is. I'm sorry that I don't have that beautiful English accent that he's got there. And of course, you can see in the video there, I've got a couple of Domino's boxes that have been put on the top there. I'm going to play this video one more time because the other piece that I want you to notice is that I put 2 pieces of wood down at the very beginning. And I do that to get a bit of a feel for the space that I need to cover. So take a look at this. See there, piece of wood 1, piece of wood 2, and then I'm putting the cardboard all around that. And I saw a question that just came through in terms of how, kind of how many layers of of cardboard should you have? And I like to put 2 layers across. So everything is for sure then covered. There aren't going to be any grass or weeds that are sprouting through into our garden beds. So once we have that down, the next thing that we need to do is basically take our pieces of wood, drill them together to build out those containing walls. And coming back to that question of how deep should your beds be, I really encourage you to get like an 8-inch piece of wood, because when you fill that to the top, you're then going to have 8 inches of soil in there, which from my end, and Mark, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd say that 8 inches is like a really great depth, because then you're planting a couple inches down and you still got 4 or 5 inches of growth for the roots to have below them.
Yeah, the soil is going to compress over time. So I find myself adding more soil along with the other nutrients sort of every spring. The depth is, you go as deep as you can afford. I mean, if you can afford beautiful yellow cedar and having it 16 inches deep, that's excellent. And it's also something to consider for people who have mobility issues, is doing it even to waist level. That works fine. just prepare for the fact that it's gonna compress over time. You can fluff it up to some degree, but a lot of the nutrients are coming out of the soil with your crops. So
Mhm.
I think the key with raised beds is that if you have something raised 8 inches, even 4 inches, it's going to get warmer in the morning. It's going to stay warmer for later into the evening. It has better drainage. It's just a very improved. It's slightly better in several ways than planting directly into the ground.
I love that. And if we, if we're starting to go up into like that 16, 20 inch, or even beyond that category, would you be filling the whole thing up with soil, or would you be putting something else down for like the bottom, 8 to 10 inches just to fill it up a little bit easier?
You could do both. I mean, um, I think if you had that kind of depth, it would be more sensible to not fill it all the way to the top, because then you get a kind of an extra windbreak, which again is going to increase the temperature of the soil surface by a couple of degrees, and that can make faster germination. That it can make a bit of difference depending on where your garden is situated.
Amazing. Love it. And I saw a question that came through from an individual. Instead of using the cardboard, could you just cut the grass, flip it over, and put it upside down? And it's funny that you mentioned that to that individual, because that's exactly what my parents do with their raised beds, actually, is they put it down and then they basically, kind of like pull out all the grass, flip it upside down, and then begin to build off of that and don't have any problems or issues with any weeds coming through when that's the case. So now that we've got our container set, the next thing that we need to do is fill it with our compost. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit play there on the video. And all that we're doing here is we're coming by with our wheelbarrow and we're bringing in just wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow full of compost. And as Mark kind of mentioned a couple moments ago, you can get these from your big soil depots, your municipalities. For the soil depot side, that could be something like an Art Naps or a Sea to Sky Soils. And then one that I'm a really, really big fan of is Sea Soil as well. A really, really amazing product. And I know that they have that at the West Coast Seeds store there out in Delta. So those would be a couple of the pieces that you'd be able to fill it up with. And if you wanted, you could add a little bit of sand in there as well to improve or increase the drainage that's happening with it. And so one thing that you might be wondering and thinking is how on earth, I'm going to play this one more time here, did Jordan bring that many wheelbarrows of compost in that quickly? And so when we were putting together this video here, I actually went out and bought all of these supplies and built this raised bed just for this session this evening so that I could show everybody how to go about building a raised bed. But what this meant from kind of a behind the scenes picture is that I actually had a whole bunch of bags of or totes of compost here ready to go. And as soon as I got the wheelbarrow out of the camera, I was lifting them up, dumping them in, and then bringing that over to the raised bed there. So cost a lot or a little bit of money, took a little bit of time, but this all comes back to bringing, and answering as many questions for you as possible and helping you all feel as comfortable and as confident as possible in the garden there. So once we have that all done, the next thing that we need to do is cut that excess cardboard so we've got a nice crisp line going across it. And this is a part that I enjoy the most because it then looks so nice and tidy afterwards with our raised bed there. So there it is looking like that. And a question that just came through that I'd love to pass over to Mark is, alongside the compost, what about working in manures?
Okay, so manure is an excellent source of organic matter. There's lots of it about, thankfully. If you know the farm you're getting it from, that's ideal, because then you can talk to the farmer about how the animals are treated, what kind of animals it's coming from, etc. Manure should always have no odor when it goes into your garden. If you drive around Delta right now, you'll see these giant piles of manure that the farmers have put out. They're very, very stinky and ripe when they get built, and over the course of the winter, the rain washes through them. They compost. They become really, really hot on the interior of the pile, and it breaks down a lot of risky materials because you can end up with salmonella and E. coli in these composts. Once it's rotted, it's great to go, and I think it's a really superb alternative to compost from your, if you can't produce your own compost, but you've got access to manure, it's a good one to go with. Mushroom manure is available from a lot of the garden centers, and it's a byproduct of the mushroom industry. So they start with manure, they grow mushrooms in it. It breaks down quite a lot, and then they stick it in bags and sell it to you for $6 a bag. But it's an excellent thing to top. And like sea soil, I think you're just adding organic matter to feed the soil microbiology.
Yeah, totally. And so much of it comes back to that. Yeah, getting the organic matter in there, being the food source for that biology for them to eat away at and free up nutrients for our plant babies. And so to answer a question from Kim there, what would you then do, with worm castings and minerals on this? And that's actually the next little video here, is that when it comes time to now transplant our plant baby into a raised bed, we're doing essentially the exact same process here. So we're going to dig a hole, 1 to 2 handfuls of worm castings, and then we're going to take our 444, mix that around, put the plant baby in, backfill it, and then some more worm castings around, and a little bit of Gaia going around the base of that plant as a top dressing there as well. And as Mark was mentioning, those babies are going to grow nice and big now.
Yeah, Gaia is but one source of organic, certified organic fertilizers. They're BC based. I've been using the product for years. I don't get paid by them or anything. That's important to note. It's what we have said repeatedly in West Coast Seeds literature is go with a complete organic fertilizer. So one with a balanced NPK ratio, 4:4:4, and it's composed of things that are of the natural world. So rock powders and plant meal, and in some cases blood meal and bone meal. They're not like Miracle Grow, which is a synthetic fertilizer, which comes as a byproduct from the petrochemical industry. So you're taking salts from chemical reactions, and it does work. It works like hot damn, but I don't want to put it anywhere near my food production. And I think it's too strong for most vegetable and home gardening situations. I just like the organic one. Why not?
Absolutely. Love that. And I've had a couple questions come through in regards to worm castings, where you can get them from. And so everybody just hang tight on that front, because I'm going to shed a little bit of light on that in about 10 minutes from now. But Mark, one other question that came through there was just like, what does 444 mean? And how much of it would you be applying when you're amending a bed?
Right. So 4:4:4 is the reference to the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium ratio in the fertilizer. Those are the 3 macronutrients that all plants need. They do different things for the plants. Nitrogen produces foliar growth. Phosphorus is really excellent for root growth. Potassium helps regulate photosynthesis. They're all fundamental to growing healthy plants. There are many, many micronutrients beyond those 3, but most fertilizers are composed of those 3, and they should have a listing of what their ratio is on the product somewhere. By keeping the ratio balanced, by using the same numbers of 4:4:4, you're not going to get an imbalance. Although that's desirable in some cases as well. A root crop fertilizer like carrot fertilizer might have the highest number might be the middle number for the phosphorus. So you might get 4:6:2, but all of those, there's an excellent article on our website called "What the Heck is 4:4" or is NPK, and it's printed in the catalog too. It's worth trying to understand, gradually learn what those figures mean, because they're really essential to, engineering your gardening year, and supplying the different sorts of plants with different nutrients at different growth stages. So flowering plants might really benefit from a higher potassium and phosphorus than they would nitrogen.
Perfect. Appreciate you shedding a little bit of light there and answering a couple questions along the way. So, folks, those are the first two areas that we wanted to cover off on for today. Essentially, how do we go about getting a new bed established so that it will be great this year, but also set up in a way that it will thrive in years to come. And so, I'd love to just get a little bit of kind of like thoughts, feedbacks in the chat function, from everybody. Has this been helpful so far? Is that feeling simple and easy to set your plant babies up to have a good season? All right, Leslie's saying so helpful. Brian saying yes. Jesse, very helpful. Very helpful. Awesome. You bet. Perfect. Amazing. Love to hear that everybody's, kind of getting a lot of value from this year. A couple of thumbs up. Great. Well, let's go ahead and dive into, if we now have a garden bed that is established, how do we go about rejuvenating it? And the place I want to get started with is like, what are the concerns that we usually see on this front? And there's kind of three of them. The first one is that if individuals have been only using synthetic chemical fertilizers in the past, what that probably means is that they had a really great growing season, but then kind of like year over year, it starts to get a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse. And that generally is because alongside that synthetic chemical fertilizer, there was not any new organic matter that was getting added into the beds. So they're starting to end up just being full of sand, silt, and clay, and none of the nutrients outside of the synthetic chemical fertilizers that have been put in there. And the third area that we see as kind of challenges when it comes to existing beds is that they don't have enough depth to them. As Mark mentioned, it needs to be at least 4 inches worth. And it's very often that I'll see beds that are 3 inches, 4 inches built directly into the ground. And the biggest recommendation that I could make to individuals that find themselves in a position where they're at less than 8 or 10 inches worth of soil is focus this year on adding that up and bringing it to being a much larger overall volume of soil that you're growing in. So to get ourselves started on rejuvenating our beds, the first thing that we're going to do is remove any of the old plants that we have in there. So I've got my kale right here that were in those beds from last season. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of start popping those out so that I can, fill that bed up with nice, beautiful, rich compost. And as I was going to each of those plants, I was knocking it with a hori-hori knife so that all of the beautiful soil that was in that root system is falling back down into the beds there. And so you can see this is what one of those root systems now looks like after I've taken out. Absolutely beautiful and amazing roots, and not any soil hardly that we're taking out of that bed. We've been able to leave the vast majority of it in there. If I was doing this in the fall, so let's say I took my cabbage plants out or my tomatoes or my peppers, in that instance, I would frequently just cut the actual plant at the base and leave the entire root system in there so that it could just decompose, and we're not then disturbing the soil ecosystem in any way, shape, or form. So once we have filled or cleared out that garden bed, the next thing that we're going to do is compost, compost, compost. And in this instance, I'm using my very own hot compost from home, opposed to, say, a store-bought one. And this comes back to like what Mark was mentioning, is that, if you're able to get your own compost pile going, because in the years to come, you now don't have to go and buy sea soil or go to your soil depot and buy it. It's all staying right within your yard. And so one question that I'd love to just ask into the chat function is if anybody would be interested in having a happy hour on composting and how to set up a compost pile. Okay, we're seeing some yeses there. Just as those roll through, take a look at the number of worms and life that is in the compost pile that I'm pulling from there. So this is one where I've worked really, really hard to get my composting process down. And based on the number of yeses that are coming through there, we absolutely will have a composting happy hour. We'll probably do this a little bit later in the season when we have some material to begin composting, opposed to right now. But do know that in the kind of years to come, this is a great way to get amazing nutrients, amazing life into your beds, and for 100% free. Okay, so once we've got that compost, we're taking it in our wheelbarrow and we're going and we're dumping 1 to 2 inches of compost on the surface. And we do not want to disturb the soil below. We're just laying it right on top. Now, the one exception that I am going to say to this is that if you are in that position that Mark and I were chatting about, where you only have 2 or 3 inches worth of compost, or sorry, of soil dirt in your beds, we want to build that up to 8 or 9 or 10 inches. So in that case, feel free to work it into the soil for this first year. And then you have your soil ecosystem that has been established, and we'll begin to add layers onto that in the years to come. Because then after a couple of years, it's looking like this. And what I did for you is I actually pulled these 4 pieces of wood off of the side of my bed. And this is what's happening beneath the surface here. And so I'd love just to get Mark's thoughts on this here in terms of what we're looking at.
So, in my opinion, when soil is at its healthiest, it's very much a living organism or vehicle for organisms. One of the guests just wrote in that she's got lots of earthworms, and that's an excellent sign. It should be dark in color. It should be like black. I like to see all the roots going on. I like to see mycorrhizae from fungi growing through the soil. Remember that earthworms may start consuming matter, and what they produce in their leavings is then consumed by a different organism in the soil, and it breaks down and it breaks down and it breaks down. And so all of the critters that live in your soil and on your soil are helping in some way to transform organic matter into nutrients in forms that they are available to the plants. That's going to make healthier plants, better disease resistance. It's going to improve biodiversity. I mean, it's all good, right? But that looks like very nice, healthy soil. That's my diagnosis.
I had to ask because to get a compliment from Mark on my soil, I'm putting that into the highlight book for the year here. Okay, perfect. So we've got our soil here nice, set, and established, and we've just added a couple of inches of compost on top. So now we're going to go ahead and just smooth that out across the top of the garden bed there. So you can see I'm just kind of cruising along and making it nice and even. And yeah, now that that soil ecosystem is established, it's really easy to be amending our beds in the years to come because there's so much amazing stuff happening beneath the surface. And so what I would then do is the same as the other instances. It comes time to transplant, we're digging a hole. We go ahead and then we go and add about 2 handfuls of worm castings, some of the Gaia 444, and then we're going to go ahead, pop our plant baby in, backfill it, more worm castings, and more of the Gaia as a top dressing. And then that plant baby is all set and ready to go. And Mark, a question that just came through there, I'd love to get your thoughts on, is when we think about a grow bag or a container, what are you doing with the soil there? Are you taking it out and starting from scratch? Are you leaving it in and amending it? What would you be doing in that instance?
Okay, so I've got in my case, I've got 9 raised beds, and we also grow peppers in sort of large black plastic containers. The peppers respond well with the black plastic because it gives the soil a lot of heat, and I got a really good crop of peppers. I don't know if that's equals 1 equals 1. When at the end of the season with that root ball essentially that's got some soil left in it, we just pop it on the top of the raised bed and break it up with a fork and incorporate it into the next batch of soil. It's going to contain some nutrients, probably not very much, but it will provide some organic matter that will help build the soil back up. I'd like the idea of recycling it whenever possible, but not in the case of small containers. We get a lot of questions about microgreens and how many times can you reuse the soil, and the answer is don't. If you can get it into a compost situation or put it into a garden bed and let it just break down naturally, that's the best way. And always use the fresh, sterilized if possible soil, because that's a very artificial kind of growing situation. It's not a lot of the natural processes we're talking about here don't take place when you're growing in small containers and trays.
Yeah, Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, just having that difference just based off the overall size and volume there. And I saw a question from Carolyn came through there. I'm wondering if worm casting and Gaia are used when you're planting seeds, not transplanting. And it's funny that you mentioned that because the team over at West Coast Seeds has actually been using our worm casting seedling mix, which is a combination of worm castings, compost, and perlite to start their seeds in. And they're getting some absolutely amazing results with that. So I want to show you, we've talked a lot about getting the beds ready for the season, and using compost, using worm castings, and using Gaia's 444 product. What could we be expecting, kind of a little bit further down the track, and as we get into beginning to harvest some of the things from our garden? And so these are some pictures of the produce that was coming out of my garden last summer here. So Swiss chard in that bucket there, absolutely full. And then take a look at the size of this cabbage head here, which is pretty massive. And again, I hadn't even used any Gaia 444 last year. This was just purely compost and worm castings. And then moving into a whole ton of beautiful and delicious tomatoes. And as I mentioned there, the team at West Coast Seeds, they have been playing around with our worm castings, and they just shared on the West Coast Seeds farming Instagram account the difference that it's making in their plants. So on the left side here, we can see just a standard seed starting mix that they've been utilizing. And as they've started to utilize our worm castings, you can see how much bigger and larger these plants already are and how much greener and more full of life they are. And as you can see, Annie here, she was saying in a couple of weeks, it'll be even more noticeable. So
yeah, and can I just jump in? The soil on the left there is pretty top grade professional potting soil as well. Like that's a very good result.
Well, Mark, thank you again. That's a compliment number 2 from you on the soils over here. So things are looking up for us. But I want to do something now, and it's a little bit crazy because it's going to cost us at Mind and Soil a decent amount of money. But we really want to set each and every one of you up this year to be successful in your gardens. And so for anybody that is attending the happy hour this evening or that wasn't able to make it and is just watching the recording, what we are doing is between now and the end of the weekend on Sunday, we are offering 100% free shipping on all of our worm castings all across Canada. So, shipping soil is definitely fairly expensive because of the weight of it. And if you do want to get worm castings into your bed this year, either to be using for your seedlings or at the point of transplanting, all that you'd have to do is go to mindandsoil.com and then go ahead and click on the worm castings there. And it is the 3-bag option that we are going to pay for your shipping to get it to your houses. So go ahead and do that. And that will be live and available until the end of this weekend. And then we will be shipping everything out at the very beginning of next week. So you'll have it for your seedlings as well as for your garden beds. So yeah, I'll be sending through more details on that in the follow-up email afterwards, but I did want to mention that right now. And what we're going to do to begin kind of wrapping up here is talk about the 4th and final area, which is utilizing an actual soil test and how we would then find which specific amendments to be targeting and bringing into our beds. And so there's a couple of reasons why we would want to be utilizing a soil test. The first one would be that if we've just moved somewhere new and we don't have any background information, any feel for what's happening in those beds, this could be a really good way to get a bit of a picture for, okay, I know where everything is at in these beds now. Second piece is if you had a specific issue or deficiency in the previous season, it might be wise to go ahead and do a soil test just so you know exactly what it is that you're working with and then can begin to fix that accordingly. And the last area, which would be the one that I would actually encourage you to go down the most, is if you just want to start, kind of taking your gardening knowledge and your gardening game to that next level, go ahead and get a soil test done, because then you can go ahead and start playing around with it. And so you're going to have all this really cool information to put to use. So to go ahead and create a soil test, what you would do is dig 6 inches down to get your soil sample. And you're going to go ahead and grab about 2 cups worth. And you're going to fill that into a Ziploc bag. And once you have done that, you're going to take that soil sample to a testing company such as Element, who is what I use to do all of my soil testing. And you want to do all of this in the same day. So this is, you want it to be getting to them kind of as fresh and as new as possible for them to do their tests on. Once they have received it, over a 3 to 5 day period, you're going to then end up getting a report back from them, and it's going to look something like this. Okay, so what we can see here is all of our macronutrients, our micronutrients, and then some other really good important information like the pH level, etc. And as we zoom in on a test like this, we could see that, hey, our phosphorus and our potassium, they're good, even potentially a little bit on the high side, but our nitrogen is in the deficient state. So we need to get more nitrogen back into those beds there. And so this is where we start thinking about very specific amendments, and we would be kind of beginning to deviate from that equal 444 and into something that's very high in nitrogen or very high in phosphorus or very high in potassium. So this is where, again, I put this into like the gardening and the soil amending 201 or even 301 category. And if this is feeling like too much, then like just zone me out for a couple minutes here. But if you are like, I do want to go down that path, then based on the vegetables that you're looking to grow, you're going to want to boost some of those nutrients in your beds. So if we are looking to grow big leafy greens, then we need to make sure that we have tons and tons of nitrogen in that bed there. And the sources that we would be looking at for our nitrogen boost would be manures, feather meal, blood meal, alfalfa meal. Those are all really great sources that are going to be heavy in nitrogen to give it that big green growth. Now for our flowering plants, we want them to have a little bit more phosphorus. And so what are the sources that we get phosphorus from? That's where we would go down the path of potentially guano. So bird or bat poop is actually a really amazing source for it. Bone meal and mineralized phosphate, all really great options. And then when we think about our rooted vegetables, that's where we are also going down the path of phosphorus, because we don't want them putting on tons of green growth on the top, but rather really, really developing beneath the surface there in the root zone. And that's where we would be looking at the same sources as for the flowering plants that are also needing phosphorus, that being our guanos, our bone meals, and our phosphate. For myself personally, I'm a huge fan of pulling from the kind of the waste cycle. So if we were using those manures, those guanos, that's a really great way, because that's, pulling something out of the waste cycle and not needing to, kind of dig for anything else or anything new along those lines. So that's just kind of like the very high level on what we would be doing and the kind of framework that you would want to be following in order to begin doing a soil test and then amending for very specific nutrients. Okay. And once again, if that is, feeling like a little bit too much, the area that I want you to, just kind of like focus in on and make sure you take from our session today is that kind of when in doubt, use your compost, use your worm casting, and use your minerals. Those are the things that you will need there. And so folks, that is everything that we wanted to cover off on this evening to get your forever homes for your plant babies all ready to go for the season. Want to say thank you so much on kind of my, behalf of myself and Mind and Soil for, joining us for this hour. And then definitely more than happy to open it up kind of 10 for 15 minutes for some questions that could come through here. But thank you all so much for the kind words and all the questions and engagement here. And so I'm going to, kind of start diving into a couple of these questions here.
So Gary's asking, what sorts of minerals? And I would respond that one of the truly great products is called glacial rock dust. Gaia also has a number of other rock powders, but glacial rock dust is a very, very fine rock powder. It's harvested from the moraine, from beneath actual real glaciers. It's a really wide range of micronutrients and minerals, and I found if you add it to, for instance, if you're planning on growing lettuce or leafy greens and you apply glacial rock dust along with some organic matter, the cell structure becomes very crisp. They retain a high water content. You notice a really significant difference if you use that. And I would, For my 9 beds, they're 4x8 beds. They're very standard size. I might go through a 10-kilo bag at the beginning of the season and just sort of, make sure. Again, don't do it on a rainy or on a windy day because it's really dusty. But I would sprinkle it on the top of the bed and give it a gentle rake in, and that does me for the year.
Awesome. Love that. Had a question that came through from France, Mark. What do you think of biochar?
I haven't used it. Everything I've read about it says it's excellent, and it's a good way to deliver nutrients, but also to hang on to nutrients and release them slowly over time. But I can't speak from personal experience, having never used it.
Cool. And yeah, question here from DC. Just when it comes to planting near an evergreen tree or just kind of any trees for that matter, are there things to be taking into consideration, looking for as you start to build out a garden in that space?
I need to see the question again. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just planting near an evergreen tree. Good idea?
Oh, um, no. Sorry. It's evergreens, particularly cedars, have they acidify the soil. Over time, they make the soil very acidic. They've got complex root systems that makes the soil hard to penetrate. If you go out in the forest and you pass a cedar tree, there's nothing growing underneath it, right? There's maybe ferns or salal, but you won't find, it's really tough to deal with that. And I guess you could create a barrier. You could dig down into that soil and create a box, or again, build up with a raised bed, apply lime probably every year to keep the acidity in balance. Um, that's unfortunately the best advice I've got on that.
Cool, got it. One that I'm really curious to get your thoughts on here, because it's one that I'm a big fan of, is compost tea. Are you a fan of using compost teas, worm teas for watering?
What we talk about here is, well, there's two ways to do it. You can water that into the soil, but you can also apply it as a foliar fertilizer so that the plants take in nutrients from the leaves as well as through their roots. Compost teas, kelp. There's a product called Kelpman, which is a liquid kelp that can be mixed with water and applied. Certainly worm casting teas. All of those things are going to deliver nutrients straight to your plants. I don't use them, but I don't need to use them. I'm not in a situation where my plants are suffering without their use. So maybe if you were growing a whole bunch of pots on your balcony in smaller containers where they weren't sharing soil, it would be easier to apply the nutrients that way, possibly.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Quick question from an individual here. My raised beds have started to get moss on them. Should I take that top layer off or mix it in, or is there something else that I should be doing here?
Moss moss is telling you something, and it's the same if you've got moss in your lawn or moss in your sidewalk. What it's telling you is that it's too wet, it's too compacted, and it's too acidic. So, and often in cases, it's too dark. So if I was dealing with moss in a lawn situation, I would aerate it to get some oxygen into the soil. I would apply lime to bring the neutral pH back up. And then I would probably plant something else there because in the long run, the moss is going to win. But if on the surface of a raised bed, remove it if you can, or put it somewhere else in your garden where it can grow, and try some of those things. Apply some lime and try and break the soil up a little bit, because it's a response to soil compaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Going in the opposite direction from there, something like blueberries that like a more acidic environment. Do you have any recommendations for how you would acidify soil for blueberries?
The growers all around Delta, where if you drive through Delta, you'll see it. They all use just wood chips, and they pile wood chips around the base of the blueberry plants. These guys are doing it on a major scale, so they're shifting these mountains of wood chips with little tractors. But in the home garden, if you've got 4 or 5 blueberry plants, get some wood chips down, and as they break down, they're going to cause the soil to be more acidic.
Perfect. And then, yeah, we have a question here around kind of like reusing soil in 5 or 10 gallon containers. Is that something that you would do, or would you be making a new mix for your containers each and every year? What would that look like?
So one of the things that we talked when we kicked off with is when something when a vigorous plant like a sunflower or a pumpkin plant is growing in a raised bed, it's taking an awful lot of nutrients and material out of that soil. And if you don't do anything and you follow it next year with a similar plant, it's not going to grow with the same amount of vigor. So in a container situation, if you're not able to remove the soil and do what I said earlier, is just get it into a raised bed to break down, or a compost to break down naturally. One option is to get all the containers empty on a big tarp, get in there with a spade and break the root balls up, take as much of the root out of the soil as you can, and then do what Jordan was doing in the beginning: mix in some perlite, some compost, and some worm castings, and then reuse the soil. If you don't do that, the soil's just going to be depleted, and if you use it over and over again, it's eventually going to be completely dust.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely there. From Jessie, she says, "My garden thanks you." And Mark, I know I can definitely say a big thank you to you as well. I think, well, yeah, we'll take maybe kind of like 3 or 4 more questions here. Yeah, there's a question from Joanne Baker. What are coffee grounds good for?
Coffee grounds are excellent for moisture retention. It's organic matter, so it will feed earthworms and it'll feed some of the bacteria in the soil. I I know a lot of people really like to use coffee grounds as well as spent tea bags, that because they break down really nicely. Um, it's just it's a good way to recycle that thing that you're producing every day. So if you have, again, a kitchen composter, perfect. Worm bin is another excellent way to get rid of coffee grounds, or just spread them on the surface of the soil in an area where you want to retain some moisture.
Absolutely. Love that. There's a question that came through in terms of slug control. Any thoughts, recommendations there? Do you go down the beer trap route?
I don't think that that's worth doing. It's a waste of good beer. So what I would say is, with all kinds of pest control, if you can identify the pest, and in this case, we know it's slugs, what do slugs really like that you've got in your garden? They like snug places to get out of the sunshine in the daylight. They like going underneath boards and bricks and pots, and getting, again, out of the sunlight. They like moisture. And so what can you do in your gardening space to mitigate all of those factors? So for instance, I would only water in the morning, not water in the evening, where you're creating basically a slug playground, because they come out at night and that's when they do their damage. So allow some of the water to evaporate off. Try to create a gardening space where there isn't water pooling. Try to remove every single brick, board, paver, anything that's creating a good space for them, and then consider going further and putting down a sheet of plywood, with the intent of having them go underneath it in the morning when the sun comes out, and then take that away and dispose of them as you will.
That's
Feed
a
them
really
to your
cool.
ducks.
Yeah,
Or
that's
get ducks, yeah, right.
That's a cool approach there. Okay, I think, yeah, just kind of one last question here for the evening, and I think it's a really good one because it continues down the path of amending beds and the soil. What would you do at the end of the season when it's kind of like late fall? You're wrapping up the beds. Are you doing anything to your beds over the course of the fall winter?
I'm letting the elements in. I want the moisture. In some cases, planting a cover crop is a really excellent idea. There's cover crops like buckwheat, and like once I'm no longer using that bed, they would grow fairly quickly. They produce a lot of organic matter. In some cases, like as in the clovers or vetches, they'll then also produce nitrogen in the soil. They can be tilled under, they can be left on top. broad beans, like the small seeded fava, is an excellent cover crop for the end of the season. It'll grow sort of all winter in most areas, perhaps not Calgary and Edmonton. Um, but then in the springtime, they are really, really easy to break down. You just knock the plants over and you've got a mulch of organic matter on your beds.
Very cool. I love it. That all sounds absolutely amazing. Well, Mark, you've made my life a little bit easier here this evening by taking the majority of the questions there. So just kind of, yeah, on my end, I wanted to say thank you to you, Mark, and I'm sure a number of folks in the chat there are saying thank you as well. And so for everybody that joined us this evening, thank you to all of you as well for joining us. It's so much fun having these happy hours, getting to spend some time together, getting to talk about the gardening season ahead, and getting, in this instance, the soils all ready to go there. Really, really, really appreciate all these amazing kind words that are coming through from everybody. And yeah, Mark, means a ton having you join us in the evening here.
It was great fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely won't be the last time that you and I are on here together. I've seen a couple of wild applauses from Anna there.
Right on.
Perfect. Well, hey, folks, we're going to go ahead and start closing things down here. I will be on the Mind and Soil chat for the next kind of hour or two. So if anybody has some questions there, I'm happy to go ahead and answer some more there. But thank you all so much for your time this evening. Thanks for all the kind words, and looking forward to seeing you all on the very next happy hour, which will all be around hardening off your plants and moving them into those forever homes that we've gotten ready over the last little while here. So thanks so much. Have a great evening, everyone.